The morning sun peeked through torn blinds as James Collins jolted awake, heart racing, sweat dampening his shirt. Another nightmare. The same one. 3 years back home, and Afghanistan still wouldn't let him go. He reached down to the floor beside his bed, fingers finding the warm fur of Rex, his German shepherd. The dog lifted his head immediately, alert to his owner's distress. "It's okay, boy," James whispered, his breathing steadying as he scratched behind Rex's ears. Just the usual. The tiny one-bedroom apartment at Pinewood wasn't much, but it was all he could afford since coming home. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's TV, the pipes groaned whenever anyone used water, and the carpet had seen better days sometime last century. But it was a roof, and in James's world, that counted for something. After showering and changing into a clean t-shirt and jeans, James clipped Rex's service vest on. "Ready for breakfast duty?" he asked, and Rex's tail wagged in response. The morning ritual was simple. Walk to the corner diner where Dolly, the owner, always had leftover bacon for Rex and a hot coffee waiting for James. As they stepped outside, Mrs. Chen from apartment 14B was watering her potted plants on the landing. "Good morning, James," she called, her smile warm. "And good morning to you too, Rex." "Morning, Mrs. Chen," James replied with a nod. These small interactions were sometimes the only conversations he had all day. Since coming home, making friends hadn't been easy. People asked too many questions, or worse, they avoided asking anything at all, treating him like he might break. The walk to Dolly's took them past the town's recruiting office. James always crossed the street before reaching it. He couldn't bear to see the young faces going in, full of the same hope and pride he'd once had. Before he knew what war really meant. Before the IED that took his team and left him with a limp, a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer, and nightmares that medication couldn't touch. At the diner, Dolly waved him to his usual corner booth. "Coffee's fresh," she said, already pouring him a cup. "Got some bacon for the hero too." She bent down to give Rex his treat, which he took gently from her hand. "Thanks, Dolly. You're a lifesaver," James said, sipping the hot coffee gratefully. "Any luck with those job applications?" she asked, knowing he'd been putting in for work at the local hardware store. James shook his head. They went with someone else. Someone with recent retail experience, whatever that means. Dolly frowned. Their loss. Anyone would be lucky to have a Marine working for them. The truth hung between them unspoken. Most employers saw the gap in his resume and the medical discharge and found reasons to hire someone else. 3 tours of duty had taught him how to lead men into combat, how to make split-second decisions under fire, how to stay calm when the world was exploding around him. But none of that seemed to translate to civilian job skills. Back at Pinewood, James checked his mailbox, hoping for news about his disability benefits. The VA had messed up his paperwork again, and his last check was 3 months late. Inside, he found only bills and a notice from management. Pinewood Apartments had been sold to Westridge Properties. In his apartment, James sat at his small kitchen table, carefully calculating how long his savings would last. Without the disability check, he had maybe 2 months before he couldn't make rent. Rex rested his head on James's knee, sensing his worry. "We'll be okay," James told him, though he wasn't sure who he was trying to convince. "We've been through worse, right?" As the day faded into evening, James heated up a can of soup and shared some with Rex. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. "Call me when you can. Love you." He'd call her tomorrow. Tonight, he didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. Instead, he stretched out on his couch, Rex curled up by his feet, and flipped through channels until he found an old basketball game. As the players moved across the screen, his eyes grew heavy. Tomorrow would be another day of job hunting, of trying to fit into a world that had moved on without him. But tonight, at least, he had a roof over his head and Rex by his side. For now, it was enough. 2 weeks after the notice about new ownership, changes at Pinewood Apartments were already visible. Fresh paint covered the lobby walls, but the rent increase notices taped to everyone's doors weren't nearly as pretty. James stared at the paper in his hands. 30% increase, effective in 60 days. He did the math quickly. That was almost $300 more each month. Money he simply didn't have. "What do you think, Rex?" he asked his service dog, who tilted his head in response. "Think we should start playing the lottery?" The sound of someone knocking made both of them turn toward the door. James opened it to find Mrs. Chen standing there, clutching her own notice. "Have you seen this?" she asked, waving the paper. "How can they do this? I'm on a fixed income." "I know," James nodded. "It's rough. I'm not sure what I'm going to do either." Mrs. Chen sighed. "There's more. They've put up signs by the entrance. No pets allowed, new policy, they say." James felt his stomach tighten. "But Rex isn't a pet. He's a service animal." "You should talk to them," Mrs. Chen suggested. "There are laws about these things." The next morning, James put on his cleanest shirt and attached all of Rex's proper service animal identification to his vest. The new management had set up an office in what used to be the building's community room. A woman in a crisp blue suit sat behind a desk, typing rapidly on a laptop. The nameplate read Karen Wilkins, Property Manager. She looked up when James entered, her eyes immediately going to Rex. "Pets aren't allowed in the office," she said, her voice clipped. "He's not a pet," James explained calmly. "Rex is a service animal. I'm a veteran with PTSD, and he's trained to help me manage my symptoms." Karen's expression didn't change. "Do you have documentation?" "Yes," James said, reaching into his pocket for Rex's ID card. "He's registered and certified." She barely glanced at the card. "That's not sufficient. We need formal medical documentation, a letter from your doctor explaining exactly why you need the animal, and proof of specialized training." "I've never needed that before," James said, feeling his heart rate increasing. Rex sensed it too, pressing closer to his leg. "The Americans with Disabilities Act protects service animals. I've lived here for 2 years with Rex." "Well, things change," Karen replied, sliding a form across the desk. "New management, new rules. Fill this out, get it signed by your doctor, and bring it back. Until then, the no pets policy stands." "This isn't right," James said, his voice rising slightly. "Rex is necessary for my health. He's not just some pet." Karen stood up. "Mr. Collins, I understand you're upset, but rules are rules. Either provide proper documentation or find other arrangements for your animal." The way she said animal made James's jaw clench. He'd faced enemy fire with more respect than this woman was showing him. "I'd also like to discuss the rent increase," he tried, changing tactics. "Many residents here are on fixed incomes or—" "The increase is non-negotiable," Karen cut him off. "Westridge Properties is bringing this building up to market value. If that's beyond your means, perhaps this isn't the right place for you." By now, a small crowd had gathered in the hallway outside the office. James recognized several neighbors, including Zoe, the college student from upstairs who was always nice to Rex. "This isn't over," James said, turning to leave. "Actually, it is," Karen replied, handing him an envelope. "This is your official notice. You have 72 hours to either remove the animal from the premises or vacate your apartment." James took the envelope with a shaking hand. "You can't do this." "I can and I am," Karen said, sitting back down. "I don't care if you're a veteran or not. Rules are rules." The room fell silent. James felt everyone's eyes on him as he walked out, Rex staying close to his side. Back in his apartment, he opened the eviction notice and read it twice, the reality sinking in. 3 days to choose between his home and the service dog that kept his nightmares at bay. 3 days before he could potentially be homeless. He sat down heavily on his couch, and Rex immediately jumped up beside him, resting his head on James's lap. "Don't worry, boy," James whispered, scratching behind Rex's ears. "I'm not giving you up. Not for this apartment, not for anything. We'll figure something out." But as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across his small living room, James wondered exactly how they would manage this time. Zoe Martinez couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. Standing in the hallway outside the management office, her phone still recording, she watched James walk away with Rex, his shoulders slumped but his back straight, the posture of someone who had faced worse battles. "Did you get all that?" whispered Mrs. Chen, who stood beside her. Zoe nodded, stopping the recording. Every word. The way she spoke to him was completely out of line. Back in her apartment, Zoe replayed the video. The sound quality was decent. You could clearly hear Karen saying, "I don't care if you're a veteran or not. Rules are rules." You could see James's face fall, the momentary flash of hurt before he composed himself. And most importantly, you could see Rex's service vest and calm demeanor, proving he was no ordinary pet. Zoe was studying journalism at the local community college. She knew a story when she saw one. After trimming the video to highlight the most shocking moments, she posted it to her social media accounts with the caption, "Veteran with PTSD given 72 hours to abandon service dog or face homelessness. This is happening at Pinewood Apartments right now." She added a few hashtags, #veteran rights, #service dog discrimination, #justice for James, and hit share. Then she went to knock on James's door. "I hope you don't mind," she said when he answered, Rex peering around his legs. "But I recorded what happened in the office. People need to see this." James looked uncomfortable. "I'm not looking for attention." "I know," Zoe replied. "But what they're doing isn't just mean, it's illegal. Service animals are protected by law." By morning, Zoe's post had been shared over 5,000 times. By afternoon, it had reached local news stations. A reporter from Channel 6 stood outside Pinewood Apartments, microphone in hand. "We're here at Pinewood Apartments where Marine veteran James Collins has been told he must give up his service dog or face eviction," the reporter said. Collins, who served 3 tours in Afghanistan and suffers from PTSD, has relied on his service animal for the past 4 years. The camera panned to show a group of residents who had gathered outside, some holding handmade signs. "Service dogs save lives," and "Stand with veterans." Mrs. Chen was there, and so was Bill from the 3rd floor, who had served in the Gulf War himself. Inside his apartment, James watched the coverage on his small TV, shocked by how quickly everything had spiraled. His phone kept buzzing with messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old military buddies, distant cousins, even his former commanding officer. "What do we do now, Rex?" he asked, and the dog wagged his tail in response. A knock at the door revealed Zoe again, this time looking excited. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "The #, Justice for James is trending nationwide. People are furious about how you're being treated." She scrolled through comments from all over the country. "This is how we treat our veterans? Shameful. My brother has a service dog for his PTSD. This could happen to him too. Someone needs to step in and help this hero." James felt overwhelmed. "I never wanted to be the center of attention like this." "I know," Zoe said gently. "But sometimes attention is the only way things change." By evening, a small crowd had gathered outside James's apartment building. A local veterans group had shown up with food and offers of legal help. 3 different lawyers had called, offering to take his case pro bono. A representative from a national service dog organization was giving interviews about the legal rights of service animal handlers. Karen from management had locked herself in the office, refusing to speak to reporters. Westridge Properties had issued a brief statement saying they were looking into the situation. As James stood at his window watching the crowd below, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Is this James Collins?" asked a deep, instantly recognizable voice. James straightened up automatically. "Yes, sir." "This is Shaquille O'Neal, but you can call me Shaq. I saw what's happening at your building and I want to help." James nearly dropped the phone. He looked at Rex in disbelief. "I'm sorry, who?" The deep chuckle that came through the phone was unmistakable. The same laugh James had heard countless times on TV during basketball games and commercials. "Big Shaq, brother. And I'm about to come fix this mess. Just hang tight for 24 hours. Can you do that for me?" As James stammered out a yes, he had no idea that his life was about to change forever. James barely slept that night. He kept replaying the phone call in his mind. Had that really been Shaquille O'Neal? The basketball legend? The businessman whose face was on everything from shoes to insurance commercials? It seemed impossible. "He's probably just going to send a check or make a statement," James told Rex as they shared breakfast. Famous people did that. They show support from a distance. Outside his window, the crowd had grown overnight. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. A group of veterans stood together, some in partial uniform, forming a protective line around the building entrance. James's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Be ready. Coming your way. Big S. 20 minutes later, the crowd noise changed. There were shouts, then cheers. James looked out his window to see a commotion at the edge of the gathering. People were pointing, pulling out phones, pressing forward. Then he saw it. A gleaming black SUV had pulled up, and from it emerged a man so tall he seemed to unfold rather than simply step out. Even from 3 floors up, there was no mistaking Shaquille O'Neal. The basketball icon towered over everyone around him, his bald head catching the sunlight, his smile visible even from a distance. A knock at James's door made him jump. He opened it to find Zoe, breathless with excitement. "Shaq is here," she gasped. "Like, actually here. He's asking for you at the front desk." James felt his heart hammering in his chest. He clipped Rex's leash to his service vest with shaking hands. "How do I look?" he asked Zoe. "Like a man who's about to get some justice," she replied with a grin. The elevator ride to the lobby felt like the longest minute of James's life. When the doors opened, he was greeted by a wall of noise. Cheers, camera shutters clicking, reporters calling questions. And there, in the center of it all, was Shaquille O'Neal, his 7'1" frame, making the lobby seem suddenly smaller. "There he is," Shaq boomed, his voice carrying over the noise. He strode forward, hand extended. The man of the hour. James shook his hand, feeling almost childlike next to the basketball star's massive presence. "Thank you for coming, sir," he managed to say. "I didn't expect." "Call me Shaq," the big man interrupted with a warm smile. Then he crouched down to Rex's level. And this must be the famous Rex. The goodest boy causing all this trouble. Rex, normally cautious around strangers, wagged his tail and leaned into Shaq's outstretched hand. "Smart dog," Shaq nodded approvingly. "He knows who's on his side." He stood back up and placed a hand on James's shoulder. "Now, where's this Karen I've been hearing about?" As if on cue, the management office door opened and Karen Wilkins emerged, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, clearly executives from Westridge Properties who had been called in for damage control. "Mr. O'Neal," one of the men stepped forward, hand extended. "This is quite a surprise. I'm Thomas Westridge. We're handling this unfortunate situation and—" "Unfortunate," Shaq repeated, not taking the offered hand. "Is that what you call illegally evicting a war hero because of his service dog?" The lobby fell silent. Cameras focused on the confrontation. "There seems to be a misunderstanding about our policies," Thomas began. "No misunderstanding," Shaq cut him off. "I brought my legal team." He gestured to a woman standing nearby with a briefcase. "They've looked at your policies. They've also looked at the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, and about 5 other laws you're breaking." Karen started to speak, but Shaq held up one massive hand. "I'm not finished," he said, his voice calm but firm. "See, I believe in second chances, but I also believe in consequences. So here's what's going to happen." He turned to face the cameras directly, his expression serious. "Since Westridge Properties won't do right by this American hero, I'm making them an offer for this entire building." He paused for effect, then smiled. "Actually, it's not an offer. It's a promise. Because one way or another, I'm buying this place." The lobby erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Residents cheered. Thomas Westridge's face went pale. James stood in stunned silence. Rex pressed against his leg for support. Had he heard correctly? Was Shaquille O'Neal really buying an entire apartment building for him? "Why?" he managed to ask when Shaq turned back to him. Shaq's expression softened. "Because 20 years ago, my uncle came back from Desert Storm. He had a service dog too. And someone just like her," he pointed at Karen, "made his life hell. Nobody stood up for him then. But I can stand up for you now." He put his arm around James's shoulders, facing the crowd of cameras. "Besides," Shaq added with his famous grin, "I've always wanted to be a landlord." The next few days passed in a blur for James. After Shaq's dramatic announcement, things moved with surprising speed. The basketball star hadn't been bluffing. His business team arrived the very next morning, armed with paperwork and determination. "He doesn't mess around, does he?" James remarked to Zoe as they watched suits and ties flow in and out of the management office. "When you're Shaq-sized, I guess you don't have to," she replied with a laugh. James found himself temporarily relocated to the Golden Palms Hotel. a place he'd driven past countless times but never imagined staying in. Rex seemed equally impressed, especially by the king-size bed they both got to sleep on. "Don't get used to this, buddy," James told him as Rex sprawled across the luxury mattress. "We'll be back to reality soon enough." But reality was changing faster than James could keep up with. On the third day at the hotel, he received a call from the front desk. "Mr. Collins, you have visitors in the lobby." Downstairs, he found Shaq waiting with a woman in a crisp suit who introduced herself as Lisa, his legal counsel. "How's the hotel treating you?" Shaq asked, giving James a friendly pat on the shoulder that nearly knocked him over. "It's amazing," James admitted. "Rex is living like a king." "Speaking of living situations," Lisa said, opening her briefcase, "we need to discuss yours." Over coffee in the hotel restaurant, Lisa explained what had been happening behind the scenes. Westridge Properties, facing a PR nightmare and legal action, had agreed to sell Pinewood Apartments in record time. The paperwork was nearly complete. "So what happens to all the residents?" James asked, thinking of Mrs. Chen and the others. "That's actually why we wanted to talk to you," Shaq said, leaning forward. "I've got plans for the building, but I need someone I can trust to help make them happen." James blinked in surprise. "Me?" Shaq nodded. "You know the residents, you understand what veterans need, and most importantly, you care. That's not something you can teach someone." "What exactly are you asking?" Lisa slid a folder across the table. Inside was a job offer, resident manager of what would soon be renamed Veterans Village. "This can't be right," James said, looking at the salary figure. It was nearly 3 times what he'd made at his last job. "It's right," Shaq confirmed. "And there's more." The more turned out to be a meeting with VA representatives that afternoon. Somehow, Shaq's team had cut through months of red tape in days. James's disability benefits would be processed immediately, with back pay for the months he'd missed. But the biggest surprise came when a tall, gray-haired man in a doctor's coat joined them. "This is Dr. Thompson," Shaq introduced him. "He specializes in PTSD treatment for veterans." "Mr. O'Neill has arranged for me to work with residents at Veterans Village," Dr. Thompson explained, shaking James's hand. "Including you, if you're interested." James felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not just a fleeting moment of it, but solid, tangible hope that things might actually get better. That evening, sitting on the hotel balcony with Rex at his feet, James called his sister. "You're not going to believe what's happened," he told her, his voice lighter than it had been in months. "I've seen it all over the news," she exclaimed. "My brother and Shaquille O'Neal. Mom would have been so proud." For the first time since returning from Afghanistan, James found himself making plans for the future, real plans, not just survival strategies. He'd have a purpose again, helping other veterans find their footing. He'd have proper treatment for his PTSD. He'd have a home where Rex was not just tolerated but welcomed. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, James scratched behind Rex's ears. "How about that boy? Yesterday, we were getting kicked out of our apartment. Today, they're asking us to help run the whole building." Rex wagged his tail as if to say he'd known all along that things would work out. James took a deep breath of the evening air. After years of feeling like he was just drifting, just surviving, he finally felt anchored again. All because someone had tried to take away the one thing he couldn't lose, and a basketball legend had decided to step in. Sometimes, he told Rex quietly, the worst days lead to the best opportunities. 3 months flew by in a whirlwind of activity. What was once Pinewood Apartments had transformed almost beyond recognition. The faded sign at the entrance had been replaced with a gleaming new one reading Veterans Village, with a silhouette of a saluting soldier beside the letters. James stood in the freshly renovated lobby, clipboard in hand, checking off the final items before the grand reopening ceremony. The worn carpet had been replaced with polished hardwood. The walls, once cracked and peeling, now showcased framed photos of military service members from different eras. "What do you think, Rex?" he asked, and his faithful companion gave an approving wag of his tail. The community center on the ground floor, once just an empty room with a few folding chairs, now hummed with activity. Computers lined one wall for residents to use for job searches. A small library filled another corner with books donated by the city's main branch. There was even a coffee station that Mrs. Chen had volunteered to manage. "James," called a voice, and he turned to see Bill from the third floor walking in, his limp less pronounced than it had been months ago. "The sign-up sheet for the PTSD support group is already half full. We might need to add another session." "That's great news," James replied with a genuine smile. The weekly support group had been Dr. Thompson's idea, but James had worried residents might be reluctant to join. He should have known better. Veterans understood the value of having each other's backs. Outside, workers were putting the finishing touches on the small playground that had replaced the building's neglected patio area. Several residents with children had returned to school or work now that they had affordable childcare, another program Shaq's foundation had funded. James's phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Channel 6 is setting up for the interview. You ready?" He took a deep breath. Even after months of being in the spotlight, he still wasn't completely comfortable with the attention. But Shaq had coached him well. "Your story helps other vets, brother. Sometimes the most uncomfortable thing is also the most important." Upstairs, James took a quick look around his own apartment. It was the same unit he'd nearly been evicted from, but now renovated like the rest of the building. The walls had been repainted, the appliances updated, and the bathroom finally had a shower that didn't leak. Best of all, a special dog door had been installed for Rex, a feature now available to all service animal handlers in the building. His phone rang. It was Lisa from Shaq's legal team. "The mayor just confirmed he's attending tomorrow's ceremony," she said, "and 3 more property developers have reached out about partnering on the next Veterans Village location." Next location. James hadn't realized there would be more. "Shaq's planning 10 more across the country," Lisa explained. "Your building is the model they'll follow." After hanging up, James sat down on his couch, overwhelmed by how much had changed. Just months ago, he'd been counting pennies to make rent, fighting to keep his service dog, and feeling like the world had forgotten him. Now he had purpose, community, and a chance to help others facing the same struggles. A knock at his door revealed Mrs. Chen, holding a basket of her famous homemade dumplings. "For you and Rex," she said with a warm smile. "A little energy before your big TV interview." "Thanks, Mrs. Chen. Want to come in for a minute? I could use the company." Over dumplings, with one sneaked to Rex when Mrs. Chen pretended not to notice, they talked about the changes in the building. How the veteran in 2B had finally found a job. How the family in 3A could afford their son's medicine now that their rent was stabilized. How the community garden on the roof was bringing everyone together. "You know," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully, "when I first came to this country, people told me the American dream was about owning a big house or a fancy car. But I think this is the real American dream, people looking out for each other." James nodded, thinking about how one act of cruelty, his eviction notice, had somehow snowballed into an avalanche of kindness. "Tomorrow's going to be quite a day," he said, glancing at the suit hanging on his closet door, bought specially for the reopening ceremony. "The whole world will be watching," Mrs. Chen agreed. "But they won't be watching the building. They'll be watching you, the man who reminded everyone what it means to serve, and what we owe to those who do." As the afternoon sun filtered through his window, casting long shadows across the floor, James realized that for the first time in years, he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning of the grand reopening dawned bright and clear. James woke before his alarm, his stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Rex sensed his anxiety and pressed his warm body against James's leg as he got dressed in his new suit. "Today's the big day, buddy," James told him, adjusting his tie in the mirror. The face looking back at him was different from the one he'd seen 6 months ago, less tired, more hopeful. The dark circles under his eyes had faded, and he'd even put on some healthy weight thanks to Mrs. Chen's regular cooking. Outside, the street had been blocked off for the ceremony. A stage stood in front of Veterans Village, draped with red, white, and blue bunting. Rows of chairs faced it, already beginning to fill with people, reporters, local officials, and most importantly, residents of the building. James made his final rounds, checking that everything was perfect. The renovated apartments gleamed. The community center was ready for tours. Even the rooftop garden had been decorated with streamers for the occasion. Looking sharp, boss called Bill, who wore his old military uniform for the event. Several other veteran residents had done the same, creating a living timeline of American service. At exactly 10 a.m., a line of black SUVs pulled up. From the lead vehicle emerged Shaq, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that somehow managed to contain his enormous frame. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "There's my man," Shaq boomed when he spotted James, pulling him into a bear hug that lifted him off his feet. "Ready for your big moment." Before James could answer, the mayor arrived, followed by a group of officials from Veterans Affairs. News cameras swiveled to capture their entrance. Zoe, who had parlayed her viral video into an internship with a major news network, gave James a thumbs up from behind her camera crew. The ceremony began with the national anthem, sung by a local choir. James stood tall, hand over his heart, Rex sitting perfectly at attention beside him. He thought of his fallen teammates, wondering if they could somehow see this moment. Then it was time for speeches. The mayor spoke first, praising the initiative. Veterans Affairs officials promised continued support. A representative from Shaq's business team outlined plans for 9 more veterans' villages across the country. Finally, Shaq stepped to the microphone. The crowd fell silent. 6 months ago, the basketball legend began, "I saw a video that made me angry." It showed a man who had given everything for his country being treated like he didn't matter. It showed a system that was broken. He paused, his expression serious. But anger doesn't fix things. Action does. He motioned for James to join him on stage. "This man right here, James Collins, he's the real hero of this story. Not because he served our country, though we thank him for that. Not because he faced hardship with dignity, though he did. But because when given the chance to help others, he stepped up." Shaq reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box, which is why I'm giving him these. He opened the box to reveal a set of keys. "These are the keys to apartment 1A at Veterans Village," Shaq announced. "The finest unit in the building. It's yours, James, rent-free for life." The crowd erupted. James stood stunned, unable to find words. "But that's not all," Shaq continued, raising his voice over the applause. "Since our friend James here mentioned he wanted to finish his education someday, I've arranged a full scholarship to State University, starting whenever he's ready." James felt tears threatening to spill. This wasn't just about an apartment or school. It was about being seen, about having his service valued, about a future he'd almost stopped believing in. When it was his turn to speak, James approached the microphone with Rex at his side. He looked out at the crowd. At Mrs. Chen wiping away tears, at Bill standing proud in his uniform, at Zoe filming with a huge smile, at all the residents whose lives had changed alongside his. 6 months ago, he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his chest. "I thought I was fighting a losing battle. I was just trying to keep my home and my service dog." He reached down to pat Rex's head. "I never imagined standing here today." He turned to Shaq. "Thank you isn't enough for what you've done. Not just for me, but for everyone here. You didn't just save a home, you built a community." As the ceremony ended and the ribbon was cut on the new Veterans Village, James felt something he hadn't experienced since before his deployment, a sense of belonging, of peace. The path ahead was clear and bright. That night, as he sat on the balcony of his new apartment with Rex beside him, watching the stars come out one by one, James realized that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the greatest blessings. Sometimes being kicked out opens the door to finally coming home.